From South Channel 100 interviews local author and finalist for the Georgia Author of the Year Award, Nancy Brandon.
Hi, I'm here with Nancy Brandon, a local author, which we're very glad to have you in the studio. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you're originally from here, as I mentioned. Did you grow up here?
I grew up here for the first decade of my life or so. I have also lived in Dublin, Georgia, and in Macon. Graduated from the University of Georgia, but my parents are still here. My brother still lives here, so I come back frequently and consider Hawkinsville my hometown.
That's great. Now, you seem to be really into the writing field. Like, you got a lot of experience in different areas of writing. Was your major in writing?
Actually, no. My major is in English education, and spent the first 20 years of my career or so kind of developing that aspect of my expertise. I've always written as part of my job, but the things that I've written have been academic articles and textbooks, but there was always that desire on another part of me that wanted to write fiction, and so I finally got started with that. And so this is my first novel to have published. Yeah,
that's great. You actually already answered one of the questions I was going to
ask
you later, so that's great. Now, what influences do you contribute your writing success to?
Well, there are several different ones. I think the strongest influences have been in my family. My mother is a writer, and was a writer still is a writer, but wrote for decades. She started here in Hawkinsville at the Dispatch and News, and then worked for the Macon Telegraph for a number of years, and also wrote for Women's Wear Daily and the Florida Times Union and many different publications. And so I've always been in a household that writes. My grandmother was also a writer. She wrote children's fiction for Highlights magazine for almost 50 years. So she was always one of my strongest advocates. I mean, from the time that I could write, she was encouraging me to write. And I would write little stories on sheets of paper that I would staple, to make little booklets. She saved all of those for me. I still have them. So she was a strong influence as well. But then as I went to college and started working on my undergraduate and graduate degrees, some of these more classic writers became strong influences also. I've always wished that I could write like Flannery O'Connor.
Another native from here.
Yes, another Georgian, and a very, very strong influence. I just think she's talented in ways that other writers, she just has a uniqueness to her voice and to her subject matter and to her wit, and it's something that I wish that I could emulate. But of course, I never will be able to. I mean, that's what makes her such a wonderful writer is the unique quality of her writing.
And what's neat about authors is that you do have your own voice, and as you write more books, which I know another book is coming out soon, then that voice is going to be coming out. Your own personality, and that's what your followers, which you already have some followers, already love about you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
What do you like most to write? Like, I know you've done newspaper and textbooks, even in fiction.
I enjoy fiction the most. I wouldn't say that that's my strongest skill, maybe because I don't have as much experience with it, but I think that I am better able to write more instructive kind of writing. The textbooks that I've written for the university where I teach, for instance, I mean, that just comes out like that. But I think it's because I've been teaching that subject matter for 20 years, and so it comes to me so readily. So maybe as I continue to write fiction and get more books under my belt, that voice will be just as fluid as the textbook voice.
Yeah. And I know that even when I was in college, I used to love to write, but as I continued my education, like the creativity is just kind of beaten out of you as you write more and more essays, and then all of a sudden you're better at writing essays than you are at writing poetry and prose and everything that you once thought that you were good at. How do you think that Do you think that holds true for you at the university you teach at?
Yeah, I mean, writing is a skill. And when I talk to my students about writing, especially the first year students, I talk about how the more you read and the more you write, the stronger your writing skills are going to be, because you're doing it all the time. So it's not a surprise to me that you got really good at writing essays, because that's what you were doing consistently. I like to use an analogy of, say, tennis or some other sport. We're not all going to be Serena Williams, but if we continue to play tennis and practice tennis and be consistent with it, we'll get pretty good at tennis. And it's the same thing with writing. The more we write, the more we read, the more we practice our literacy skills, the better we're going to get at that. So students who see writing as just an academic exercise are never going to become Ernest Hemingway if they don't really have that passion for it. But if they continue to work at it and work at it and work at it, they'll get pretty good at it. And then there are those students who do have the passion for it, and they want to stretch their writing skills and try different writing genres, and that's where the Ernest Hemingways are coming from, is the ones that not only practice it but really want to make it their life's work, something that they love to do rather than something they have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, having grown up here, I know that all of our Hawkinsville viewers are going to want to know this. Have you drawn any experiences or any characters' personalities from experiences or people here?
Well, yes. The short answer to that is yes, and I think every writer does that to some extent. I think that readers, when they read authors that they love or books that they love, they almost readily want to say, what part of the author's life did this come from, and where did that come from? And sometimes there is a direct answer, and sometimes there's not. Sometimes the scenes or the characters or the episodes are an amalgam of some experience or some idea that the writer had. But of course, this book is set in Pineview, which is very close to where I grew up. When I set out to write this book, at first I wanted to put it in Hawkinsville. But then I decided against it because I didn't want readers to think, oh, this character is that person and this character is that person. I thought that readers might see their town and themselves in the story a little bit too closely. And so I decided against that. Then I decided to set the story in Hartford. And I wanted to pay homage to that community because it was thriving a lot more in the 19th century than it is now. But then when I drafted this novel and started working with it with my writing group, I'm the only Georgian in my writing group, and so many of the people who were from up north read it and said every time we read the town Hartford, we think Hartford, Connecticut. We think you need to change they said just make up the name of a town. And I didn't really want to do that. So then I chose Pineview because that's also very close to the area. It's very familiar with people in this part of the state, but for people who aren't familiar with small Georgia towns, it reads a little bit more like a fictional town. So I thought that name worked well, and my writing group did also. So the setting is a strong influence. There is an undertaker named Pritchett, and of course we used to have a Pritchett's funeral home here, and Clifton Pritchett, of course, is still in Hawkinsville, and so that was kind of a little bit of a nod to him. The undertaker's assistant is named Harley, and my brother's name is Harley, and and that's something that he doesn't know this, but every time I write a work of fiction, I try to stick the name Harley in there somewhere. And that nobody has noticed that yet because this is the first book that's been published, but it's just kind of a little something that's fun for me to do. So,
that's cool.
So I have, but I also have a sister, and so I don't want to leave her out, so I'll need to write a book and stick her name in there somewhere too. So I drew names from the people that I knew, and especially my ancestors. For instance, the last name Barksdale, B-Dot's maiden name is Barksdale, Netta's maiden name is Barksdale, and that's a family name. Netta's parents are David and Lavinia, and those are names of great-great-grandparents. So that I wanted, most of the names to be indicative of the time period, and an easy way for me to do that was to look in the family tree and see what kinds of names people had at the beginning of the 20th century. So, yeah, there were lots of influences from my life, from my experiences from Middle Georgia. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Are the characters that are named after family members and the people in the community, are their personalities similar to the real people?
No, and I didn't want people to say, ooh, that's this person. And so even though, for instance, there's an undertaker named Pritchett in the novel, we never meet him. And there's an undertaker's assistant named Harley, but we only get to meet him. He's a minor character. We don't really develop him, but he's just a way for information to get across. Mm-hmm. We see him driving a wagon and carrying the dead to the graveyard, or we see him telling people you need to wear a mask, and it's just a way to kind of include some details about the influenza pandemic that otherwise wouldn't have gotten out.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from reading the synopsis of the book on your website, I know that my first thought was, what is that character's secret?
Mm-hmm.
Her husband is the only one that knows a secret. What is the secret? So can you tell us a little bit about the book itself and the storyline?
Yeah, sure. Not going to tell you the secret. Don't want to spoil it. But yeah, everything is kind of, everything that happens to B-Dot is kind of grounded in something that's happened that she doesn't want anybody to know about. It's the reason that she has married her husband. It's eventually the reason that she ends up in Vineview, and it ends up being the central conflict in her character. So as we see the story developing and as we see her character developing, eventually you find out what her secret is. But to tell you a little bit more about the story itself, it's about two women who were fighting for survival during the 1918 influenza pandemic. So the backdrop of this story, even though these characters are fictional and the events are fictional, the historical backdrop is actual. So B-Dot leaves her home in Savannah and leaves her husband to visit her cousin Netta, who lives in Pineview. And Netta is married to Pineview's only doctor. And when B-Dot arrives is about the same time that people start becoming infected with Spanish influenza. So Netta's husband has to take care of all of these patients. And Netta is pregnant with her first child, and so he sends Netta and B-Dot out to the country to try to keep them from contracting influenza, and he's got to stay in town and treat the patients. So there's this tension that develops in the story. Will Netta have her baby out in the country, or will she have her husband's help? Are they going to get influenza? How are they going to make it out there in the country on their own? And so then another major character, Will Dunaway, who lives out in the country, becomes involved and helps them kind of work their way through this experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming this character Dunaway, that's who he has a crossing named after himself,
Well,
and that's the character the book is named after?
He has a trading post, and at the beginning of the story, he's a World War I veteran, and he has returned, he's been injured and has just recovered and has returned from war, and he wants to get his life going again. And he has a piece of property at a crossroads, and so he decides to build a trading post, and he names it Dunaway's Crossing. That's the name of the store. And Netta and B-Dot eventually end up staying at that store while Netta's husband is treating patients in town.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I love how you are including real historical events with fictional characters. I think that's very interesting, and it's even kind of educational in a way, even though it is fiction, it's factual at the same time. And on that note, I noticed that on your website you have discussion questions for this book. Now, did you have, writing this book, in mind for your students?
Not really. I had it in mind for just a general audience, but I thought that the story, because the main characters are women, I thought that the readership would be primarily women from the ages 25 to 60 or so. I'm noticing that I do have a number of male readers who are enjoying the book as well, and I'm really glad of that. But it's not a book that I ever thought would be assigned to students. In fact, when I've had book signings, I've had readers come to me and say, oh, I'd like to buy this for my babysitter, or I'd like to buy this for my niece who's in high school. And I always say, read it first before you give it to a younger person, just because there's some subject matter that is it's kind of heavy duty. And so I don't want to say that this is a book that anybody would read. I think that if there's a younger reader who's interested, the parents should read it first and make a decision about it.
Okay, that's good to know for our viewers especially.
Yeah, definitely appropriate for a college-age student, but I just know that many parents have different feelings about what their high school and middle school age students should be reading, and so I definitely think that any parent should read any book first before making a decision about whether the kid should read it.
Right. Okay. Now, can you describe your experience when you found out that you were a finalist for Georgia Author of the Year? That seems exciting.
Well, it is exciting, and that was, I think, the most exciting part about learning I was a finalist was that a lot of my family members were there too, and so I could share that excitement with them. My mother was there, and because she's a writer, she was really excited to see her child as a writer be recognized that way. So that was pretty cool. It's hard to put into words, the emotions that I was feeling at the time. But it was satisfying. It was kind of affirming. When I published this book, I never realized how many people would enjoy it. I really didn't. I kind of hoped that somebody would buy it and maybe open it up. It never occurred to me that it would sell as well as it has. And so to be named as a finalist for the award it was affirming to me in that respect.
Yeah, it seems like it would be. And just so our viewers know, Miss Brandon was one of 2 finalists. So you, in a sense, were like runner-up. I was reading on your blog today, which was very fascinating. You should check out her blog.
Yeah, well, I was the finalist is the runner-up, and then there's the award winner. And the award winner is an author named Kimberly Brock, and her novel is titled The River Witch. And so I do want to acknowledge her and congratulate her. She's a wonderful person and a talented writer, and I'm delighted that she has won that award. But I'm also just thrilled to be named as the finalist. There were 15 nominees for the first novel category, so my odds were kind of moderate, I thought, at best, and so to be selected as a finalist was a real thrill, and because this was a statewide competition.
It's pretty big.
Yeah, I'm still kind of surprised and pinching myself for it. Yeah.
And one final question: there's talk of a new book coming out, and I'm sure with Dunaway's Crossing being an Amazon Kindle bestseller, you have a loyal following that is anxious to read this new book. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
I can. I'll first mention that I have had a number of readers ask me to write something else, and I'm working on it. But in the meantime, I have published electronically a collection of short stories, and it's titled Decades of Southern Stories. It's available through Amazon right now. And so readers who are waiting for the next novel, this collection of short stories can be something, I guess, to snack on until dinner is served, so to speak. But the second novel is titled Show Me a Kindness, and it's not a sequel to Dunaway's Crossing. I have gotten some requests for that as well, but I don't know what B.Dot's next story is going to be. So the sequel isn't in the making yet. This next book is set in Vidalia, Georgia, in 1929, 1930, right around the time when farmers started realizing that this onion is pretty sweet and tastes pretty good, and this might be something that we can market. And of course, the book's not about an onion, but I like for my books to have like a historical backdrop, and so the backdrop in this new book is the onion. But it's about two friends, and they've grown up together, and the love of a woman rips apart their relationship. And it's very hard for them to try to mend that. And just as they're about to mend that rift in the relationship, another woman appears and threatens to tear them apart again. So it's really about the relationship between two friends and how they have to overcome a couple of obstacles to maintain that friendship.
Sounds like it could contain some pretty deep thoughts in there.
Yeah, I hope so. This book really is about personal relationships, and this next one is going to be as well. But I just have this affinity for setting my stories in the past and putting some actual places and some actual phenomena in the story in which to ground it. So, for instance, even though this next book is about two men who are friends and trying to repair this conflict, there's also another character who steps in, and she's a very good cook. And people start to realize this onion tastes pretty good, and she starts putting them in pies, and so that just kind of weaves its way through the story. And I think that's the part that it makes it fun for readers, because they can see something that they're familiar with and that they know a little bit more about, and they can interact with the story a little bit more that way.
Yeah, and not even being from Vidalia, being from more middle Georgia, we know about the Vidalia sweet onions.
Yeah. That's right.
So I think that is something that probably all Georgians will at least know about, which is really cool, and it's always a neat thing to read about, even just an item that is native to your home state. It just makes you feel so special.
Well, it does, and if you think about it, I can't think of any other story that's set in Vidalia, just like there's no other novel that's set in Pineview, Georgia. So even though around the world people know about the Vidalia onion, there are very few people in this world who can pronounce Vidalia correctly. And I can't think of any works of fiction that actually take place there. So this is a way to honor what the city of Vidalia and what agriculture have done for the state of Georgia, and also a way to entertain readers with a fictional story.
Where can people get copies of the book? Is it sold in local retail shops, or I know that you can get on Amazon as well. Are there other places? Yeah,
there are. In fact, if people locally want to purchase copies of them, they can get them at Kimberly's Fine Antiques over on Commerce Street. And all of those copies are autographed. So run over to Kimberly's to pick up a copy. I've had a couple of book signings over at Kimberly's as well. In fact, I debuted the book at Kimberly's Antiques, and then made an appearance during the Hometown Harvest Festival last October. So people have been coming in and buying from them pretty regularly. So that's Kimberly's. That's where you can get it here in town.
All right, that sounds good, and that sounds like a steal since it's already autographed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and hopefully we will see you again when your next book comes out, and maybe even with another award.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.